Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to today's Los Angeles County Economic Developments Corporation, LAEDC's webinar on workers' comp workplace violence. Just to let you know that this webinar will be recorded. Also, we will be taking questions and answers at the end. Also wanted to let you know, again, LAEDC, private nonprofit 501c3. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Sara Zarabian, and I am one of the regional managers with the Business Assistance Program at LAEDC. LAEDC, what is our vision? It's a reimagined Los Angeles regional economy, growing, equitable, sustainable, and resilient that provides a healthy and high standard of living for all. And what's our mission? It's reinventing our economy to collaboratively advance growth and prosperity for all. What do we do with the Business Assistance Program? Is we provide technical assistance to the businesses. And what does that consist of? Well, LAEDC offers business and technical assistance with complimentary consulting to small businesses across all industry sectors. We provide business assistance by offering you experts that are available Los Angeles county-wide, so city and county-wide. We are here to help you overcome challenges so you can grow and hire with resources that include workforce training and development, permitting assistance and expediting, tax incentives, financing resources, access to capital, grant and loan opportunities, information, also help you with site selection and relocation, connection to public and private resources, cost containment strategies, business resilience resources, programs for manufacturers. We can also help you with utility programs like LADWP, Southern California Edison, and direct help to employers overcome challenges and retain staff. Also, we do have business and financial resource referrals, small business referral webinars, analysis, and economic outlooks from LAEDC's Institution of Applied Economics. But more than anything, we also do assist with cost segregation, and that's a little part of what you're going to be hearing about today. What are connections to resources? Well, with permit assistance, we can actually refer you over to city permits, LA County Public Works, LA County Public Health Department, LA County Building and Safety. With financing, SBDC, the Small Business Development Centers, county loans, business, expansion and technology, and grants if they're available. Energy efficiency, such as Southern California Edison, LADWP, and municipal programs. And also workforce. We work very closely with our America's Job Center of California, where they can help you recruit, screen, and a lot of the programs that they have to offer, which is on-the-job training, transitional subsidiary employment, and then also employment training panel. Also, they can help you with internships, business technical assistance, and other workshops. Our economic data is on economic forecasts and demographics, industry-specific data, real estate site searches, and then next we have our risk management, employee benefits, and of course, workers' comp. This is our team of Business Assistance Program. We have our director, Barbara Levine, Lyndon Johnson, our associate director, Leonard Morales, who's our senior district manager, and of course our regional managers, Ricky Michael, myself, Mavon Rendenia, and Rafael Contreras. We're all here to help you and answer any questions for your business. So next, what I would like to do is I would like to introduce you to Joey Freeman with Epic Brokers, and this session of Workplace Violence Prevention Program. So in this session, which is one of our 3 sessions that we've had with workers' comp, and this is our second session, is to learn about the requirements and components of SB 553, which is a new 2024 California law. And in this session, we're also going to know how and where to get started, including who must be involved and who should be involved, hear how other companies are developing their WVPPs and training their employees. A little bit about Joey. As a safety professional and consultant, Joey has assisted companies large and small with their risk management and prevention efforts for over 20 years. Joey leads Epic's risk control team of safety professionals to help their customers develop safety programs and continuously improve their risk management efforts. Joey, welcome. Thank you so much. Also wanted to thank Epic Brokers, Rose Nordbrock, as well as Pablo Barros for giving us the opportunity to work with you. Thank you so much, Joey.
Thank you, Seda. I'm learning a lot about the LAEDC already. You guys provide a lot of great services, so we're just happy to participate on behalf of Epic. Thank you for inviting us. So many of you have probably heard about this new California law that hit the books late last year, late in 2023. We're going to get into that today. So you can go ahead and go to the next slide, please. Just to see if everyone can hear me and be participative if possible. If you'd like to answer this, please do in the chat window. While this is being answered, I'll speak to one part of the law that I'm not really going to get into a whole heck of a lot today, and I'm sure you'll understand why. If you were to look at the actual text of SB 553, the new workplace violence prevention law in California, a significant amount of the text is about the ability for an employer to take out a restraining order on behalf of one of their employees based on just cause or report of concern and so forth. I'm not going to get into that too much today for a few reasons. One, I'm not an attorney. And that questions like that, advice really should be handled by general counsel. And I think those situations hopefully will be few and far between. You hopefully won't have to deal with a report where you may have to get involved like that from an employer standpoint. But in the event that you do, my advice is to talk to your attorney quickly and get help on how to navigate that process, because it can be tricky, as you probably imagine. Okay, Seda, we could go to the next one, please. Thank you so much. So let's talk a little bit about what brought us here to this point. Actually, the new law that goes into effect July 1st of this year isn't the first workplace violence prevention law in California. Actually, in 2017, just the healthcare industry, Cal OSHA created a new regulation just for healthcare facilities as it relates to workplace violence. And the reason they did that at the time is because that industry, with nurses and doctors and treatment providers, had a higher risk of workplace violence incidents, including shootings at hospitals. So very specific and unique risks when you have people on medication where they may not be behaving the way they normally would, and maybe they act out in certain ways. And there's a different level of care and a different approach for that kind of situation. So healthcare has their own dedicated workplace violence prevention law that's on the books. So this one we're going to talk about today doesn't really apply to healthcare facilities. But it's actually not just California. Believe it or not, there are 8 other states that currently have some level of workplace violence prevention program requirement from a labor standpoint. And those are Washington, California, and Oregon. So obviously the West Coast is covered. We've got Maryland, New Jersey, Connecticut, Illinois, and in New York, for public employees, there's a workplace violence prevention law, but not necessarily for all employees, not yet. As you could probably guess, the trend is probably heading in a way where it's going to apply to all employees in many more states too. Next slide, please, Seda. So unfortunately, these are probably some events that aren't too far from mind and may still be top of mind for many of you today. Last year in 2023, in January, a significant workplace violence event happened in Half Moon Bay. You may have heard about it. 7 individuals were killed. A worker was upset with something that happened at work, and I'll tell you what the motive actually was. It's kind of unfortunate. But in two locations, Terra Garden and in Concord Farms, three individuals were killed at one location, four at another. And based on the investigation, what prompted this sort of action by the shooter was, and this will be important to know as we get into the session today, it was being upset because the individual supervisor demanded that he pay a $100 repair bill to for a forklift that was damaged. And I bring that up because many of you would think probably that, gee, $100, was it really worth that? And obviously the answer to that is no. But the thing to think about with that is we never really know what kind of stressors or challenges someone has inside them and what may trigger something to put them over the edge. And sometimes we may think it may be a minor thing that we can't relate to. And hopefully that's the case. Hopefully we can't relate to that kind of behavior. But we have to be aware that a lot of folks out there aren't like us. And if we think back over the past few years, particularly, I hate to bring up COVID these days, but I kind of feel compelled to sometimes. In late 2020 and into 2021, many of us saw in the news arguments in retail establishments, for example, about whether or not I have to wear a mask. Some people were frankly getting violent. They were fighting with store retail clerks and employees, and those folks didn't deserve that. They didn't sign up for that. That wasn't their job, yet they were kind of thrust into it. A lot of protests in the past few years, so it feels like nationally we've just got a lot of tension. We're some of us can be set off at the minor things, and we just need to figure out how we can kind of control this and make sure that we have processes in place where, to the extent possible, we can recognize concerning events or concerning behavior up front and maybe put some processes in place to try to prevent some kind of outcome like they had at Terra Glen and in Half Moon Bay. Also in April 2023 at a Home Depot in Pleasanton, California, a shoplifter came in, tried to get something, and what I would say is a natural reaction by many retail employees is to try to stop a theft, right? It would be similar to someone breaking into your house. In some cases, you feel like you kind of have to protect your work. You have to protect your home. Obviously, that's not what we want retail employees to do, but it's understandable that without some instruction and coaching and reinforcement from an employer, that may be the natural reaction in the event that no other advice has been given. In a retail environment, obviously we need to make sure that people understand, hey, it's not worth it to try to stop a shoplifter. That's what law enforcement is for, and it's not for rank and file employees. We have to keep drilling that in retail environments. And of course, in 2021 at Santa Clara at the Transit Authority, 10 individuals were killed. So these issues are kind of becoming all too often, as we all know, and now there's regulation in place from an employer standpoint, we have to do something about it. Okay, Seta, next slide, please. So today, a lot of people think about, oh, gee, we've got to have a written program for this, and that's true, but that's only about one of 4 sections. Really, think about it in these terms. Number one, you have to do a risk assessment for your locations as it relates to the possibility of workplace violence. So it's not a typical risk assessment where you can evaluate your risks based on what you can see and processes that you know well. This is more, in some ways, like a threat assessment because you're assessing your risk based on the potential for a behavioral outcome that's undesired, which is really a different thing. And we'll get into some tips on how to do that. But the 4 parts are really the risk assessment, writing your plan, developing your training program for your employees, and then the other section is about the incident log. And the reason I describe it as its own section is because it has to have so much detail and nuance included in these logs. And there's some privacy concerns that we'll get into. So those are the 4 main components that we'll talk about today. Okay, Seta, next slide, please. So when we talk about the actual written plan, There's elements within the written plan that are dictated by the state, or requirements within the written plan. So, for example, you have to have an individual that's the designated person responsible for the plan. The role that person would have could be shared amongst other, like, for example, a general manager role, or it could be an individual like a safety director. It could be anyone, but that person needs to be named and titled in the document, because when it comes to the training session, you have to have an ability to have an interactive Q&A between attendees and, quote unquote, someone knowledgeable with the plan. So not necessarily the facilitator, not necessarily the top boss, but it has to be with someone familiar with the plan. Usually that's the individual named as responsible for it. If you've got your written IIPP, or injury and illness prevention plan, same thing kind of applies. There's an administrator, so that could be the same person. In many cases, I think it will be. Number two, you are required to have employee involvement with the risk assessment, with developing your training, and with evaluating, so the risk assessment component of it. There is no requirement to include all of your employees. There is a requirement you have to have non-management employee representation. So I think a safety committee, a well-functioning safety committee, is an excellent group of people to meet this part of the standard. They can help with the risk assessment. They can help evaluate the training before it goes live, as they say. And there's other areas they can help with control measure recommendations and so forth. So if you do have a functioning safety committee, a strong safety committee, I think they'd be excellent to recruit to help you meet these challenges. Let's see, communications. You have to have an ability to report a threat that may be occurring right now, for example. How are you going to notify individuals quickly and effectively when you really don't have a lot of time? Say, for example, an active shooter were to enter your location or to be on your campus. At that point, you're thinking about, okay, how do we get this information to the people that may need to hear, run, hide, fight, or cover, or evacuate. Procedures for reporting the incidents and responses, procedures for how you're going to investigate concerns, what the training requirements are going to be and the frequency, your incident logs, your compliance methods, similar language to the IIPP, how are you going to ensure employees comply, and then annual reviews. So annually at minimum, your workplace violence prevention program, I may refer to it as the WVPP, it has to be reviewed on an annual basis. Anytime changes are found, either through an evaluation, new exposures, or maybe after an event occurred and you had some lessons learned, if that were the case, you have to update your plan. It's for that reason I typically recommend that you have your workplace violence prevention program as a separate plan from your IIPP. They're all part of your master safety program, but whenever you change either document, technically it triggers a regulatory requirement to retrain your individuals, your employees. So if you make a change to your workplace violence prevention program, but you don't change the IIPP, well, you only have to retrain the workplace violence prevention program content. You don't have to go back and retrain two subjects. So you can do it either way. It's just my recommendation to keep them separate because it's easier to manage that way, in my opinion. Seta, we can go next. So we talked about active safety committees. I think we should seek their involvement with the assessment, with the controls and communications. The difficult part might be, from a behavioral standpoint, who amongst our employees may have the most risk if a workplace violence event happened here. So think about the differences between maybe a driver that you have that may be off-site much of the day, because they're included. We have to have protocols in place for those folks too, in terms of communication. If they're exposed to different hazards than those on site, which in most cases they would be because of the site. So I think they're an excellent group. Also, if you have a work site that includes workers that may have more than one employer. So think about a large construction site, large high-rise building being built in LA, for example. Typically, you're going to have a lot of workers there, and there's a lot of different employers linked to those workers. You may have 8 different construction companies or contractors on site at a given time. So part of this law requires that in a case like that, where you've got multiple employers on site, that there's coordination between all of the employers, and someone has to be the lead with that. So I bring this up because you can't just think about how do we get our employees, the ones that we write paychecks to, how do we notify them in the event of an emergency? But anybody that may be on the same site, it gets kind of complicated when you think about company cell phones being provided or not, and whether or not those are going to be effective in a situation where you need quick and effective communication. And I'll just give you an example of this. Maybe 5 to 10 years ago, maybe a little bit longer, mass texting kind of became a push within the industry because everybody typically carries a cell phone. If you need to get in touch with people that may be out in a warehouse, maybe in a field, who knows? That became kind of a crutch for a lot of companies, or a go-to on how to communicate effectively. And a lot of times it works. A lot of times it still works. But I tend to suffer from what I call app overload some days. And between Microsoft Outlook, Teams, Zoom, the texting function, I've got so many things vibrating and dinging that a lot of times I feel like I can't get any actual work done. So what I've done is I've turned off a lot of these notifications, because I may have needed a reminder that somebody texted me 10 years ago. Hey, look at your phone. Somebody's trying to reach you. These days, I need no such reminder. So I'm constantly looking at my phone throughout the day. So if I've missed a text, it may be for an hour or two, but it won't be for all day. But I think that's a key point. If other folks are out there doing that, will the traditional communication methods that we've gotten used to in the past few years, will they continue to be as effective as they once were if we really try to communicate quickly and effectively? And sometimes the answer to that may be no. It could be a lot of noise on your site where you may not have the ability to hear a text dinging or a phone call coming through. So there's a lot of different concerns with it, but a lot of different ways to approach it too. Seta, we can go to the next one. So Cal OSHA and the FBI have created 4 categories for workplace violence incidents. And these are important because when it comes to your incident log, if you have a reported incident or an actual incident that occurred, part of what you have to include in your log is what type, based on these 4, the violence event was. So type 1, it's someone that has no reason to be at your business, no legitimate reason to be at your business. So a good example with this would be a robbery, right? A gas station, someone comes in to rob the cash register. That would be a type 1 violence incident situation. And it's because the perpetrator, the gunman, they had no reason to be there other than to cause harm. They weren't there for work. They weren't there to visit someone else. They weren't there to pick somebody up. They were just there to cause harm. Type 2 violence is violence directed at employees by customers, clients, or visitors, but not other employees. So a good example here would be a fight that breaks out at a bar, and the bartender gets punched or gets hit somehow. That would be a type 2 violence situation. You had people that had a legitimate reason to be there. They were your customers, but they weren't your employees that got involved with each other, which actually tends to be the case most of the time. So type 3 is violence against an employee by a present or a former employee, supervisor, or a manager. And with regard to active shooter incidents at work, so workplace violence issues only, about 70% of the issues that happen here are type 3. It's someone that felt they were wronged for whatever reason. and they come back and they're there to get even as they think. So that'd be a type 3. Type 4 would be violence committed against someone that works there, but has a relationship or an affiliation with someone that works there but doesn't work there themselves. An example here would be the spouse of an employee. Maybe they're going through a difficult divorce, and then the one says to the other, "Hey, I know where you work. I'll be there. You'll be hearing from me." That could be construed as a threat. If it were, it'd be a type 4 violence incident, and that would need to it would need to go on the log, even though it didn't occur. It's a report of an incident, and it would need to be investigated. And then you'd have to get back to the employees about what you found, what you're going to do about it, or whether or not it's a valid concern. Let's go to the next slide, Seda. So I think a SWOT analysis is a good approach to conducting these kinds of risk assessments for workplace violence. And you don't want to look at this as your entire risk assessment because it's really too broad. But if you want to break these down into, okay, let's talk about how we're going to communicate in the event of an emergency. What are our strengths? What are our weaknesses? What could get us into trouble? Where do we think we can make some improvements? I think that way of looking at it can be very, very effective. So when you consider it this way, your strengths could be the way you're laid out, where you have many employees working in the same group together, which would be a good thing. And now some may say, well, doesn't that increase the likelihood that more deaths could occur? Yes, that would be true. But most of the time, when you have a workplace violence incident, well, I don't know if it's most. Many times you have employees that are working in areas that aren't that are kind of lone areas, and they have difficulty of getting out of the area, or they may not have strong an ability to communicate effectively there. I'll give you one real world example that's actually been in place for longer than this new regulation has been with us. Hotel housekeepers, right? So think about the nature of a hotel housekeeper. Typically, they're going to be alone throughout most of their day or much of their day, right? They're going in and out of rooms, cleaning, getting ready for the next guest. And that tells us that, okay, well, if they're in a guest room, they've got a limited ability to get out of the room, right? They also may have a difficult ability to communicate. Now, granted, they could pick up the phone in the room and call the front desk, but could they be told about some threat that's heading up to, floor 7? Maybe not. So if you think creatively and kind of outside the box about how do we make sure that these employees can tell us if there's a concern too. Let's say somebody breaks into the room when a hotel housekeeper is cleaning it, and they've got bad things in mind, assault, sexual assault, something like that. Hotel industry has started handing out these little devices. These are personal alarms by the Mace company and the pepper spray company. But those have the ability to communicate effectively. Hotel processes, the ones that have adopted this, have standards in place where they know exactly what to do when anytime that button is pushed. And granted, there could be false alarms, but that is an effective control measure for the environment that these housekeepers are in and the risk that they have that somebody could come into the room. So I think this is a good way of kind of looking at things. I thought this would be good to show today. Sada, next slide. So controlling our risks. First, we have to think about what kinds of questions should we ask, or should we be thinking about it when we're trying to protect our employees? So just a few, and as I said before, predicting human behavior, especially when it relates to the prevention of a crime, can be very, very difficult. How do you prevent that? So there's certain things you can ask about your exposure level. So one would be, do you have employees working late at night in areas with limited lighting? Do they handle cash as a part of their normal job? And why ask that question? Well, a lot of people, when they break into a place, cash is what they're looking for. So one could argue that if they're handling cash late at night, it might raise their risk, raise their exposure a little bit, something to think about. Loan workers at night, for example, What would the concerns be? Well, it depends on access, but if you have, let's say, a wine tasting room or something like that, you could have your patrons. Remember the type 2 violence? You can have your patrons that maybe have a little bit too much, and maybe they get a little handy with people that are there, and your employees may not like that. So there's just a few things that you really need to think about. It's difficult to say exactly what questions you could ask because in today's session we've got people from all kinds of different backgrounds. So it varies quite a bit. But Cal OSHA is putting resources on the website within the past 3 weeks, I think. So they're adding content that will help you ask the kind of questions that you should ask to identify where are your opportunities to make it a little bit safer. Where can you improve your communication practices? Can you control your access areas better? Everyone's going to have a different answer to that question, but it's the kind of questions that we should be thinking about up front. We can go to the next slide, Sam. So I've talked about this probably in detail already, but when you think about communication, it's a very important part of this. You think about it in 3 parts. One, how should an employee notify management that, hey, I'm at this area near the entrance and I saw somebody coming in that shouldn't be here. Maybe it was an employee that someone knew that was terminated the week before. So it was a red flag for them to notify. You have to have processes in place where that communication can get to leadership quickly, and leadership can activate the next step, whatever that may be. Depending on your site, it could be alarms to take cover. It could be calling the police. Depending on what kind of operation you're in, what kind of business you're in, you may have other controls as well. So, for example, metal detectors and things like that. Some people think those are really good controls, and a lot of times they're effective, but not always. There was a active shooter incident in Indianapolis at a FedEx location, and they had guards at every entrance. They had metal detectors, and yet failures occurred, and a perpetrator was still able to get in there and kill 9. It's terrible. Also, you have to be able to get back to the employees after either an event happened or a reported event that might happen was reported. You have to get back to the employees and basically close the communication loop and say, okay, just let everybody know this was reported, this occurred, this is what happened. Hopefully you were able to get out of it without any injuries or deaths or anything like that. But lessons learned, here's what we're going to do about it. That has to be part of that communication loop, part of the regulation. And then the third, obviously, is how to quickly and effectively communicate to all during an emergency. So the first one is, how does an employee report the potential incident first? And then how does leadership get that information out to everybody else that could be impacted by it? And then the third is actually kind of closing the loop. So maybe I should rearrange these on the slide here, but hopefully that makes sense to everyone. Set the next slide, please. So incident logs. These are not to be taken lightly. I'll put it like that. There is a ton of information that has to be required, that has to be included on these incident logs. And I'll read the list to you. It's lengthy. So I'm going to read verbatim, and you'll understand why. The employer shall record information in a violence log after every incident. The information shall include the following: the date, time, and location of the incident, the workplace violence type, remember the 1 through 4 that we talked about earlier, a detailed description of the incident. So far, all well and good, right? Classification of who committed the violence, including whether the perpetrator was a client, a customer, a family, a friend, a stranger with criminal intent, a coworker, supervisor, a manager, partner, spouse, parent, relative, or other perpetrator. You have to include the classification of the circumstances at the time of the incident, including but not limited to whether or not the employee was completing their normal job duties, whether they were in an isolated area or alone, whether or not they were able to get help, or whether they were in an unfamiliar location. You also have to include information like, was the lighting appropriate in the area? Was staffing appropriate that day? So a lot of detail that we're not typically used to having to put in there, circumstantial detail, and it's lengthy. So also, I think this is important to say too. When we think about workplace violence, I think there's a tendency for us to think, okay, active shooter, that's what we're talking about. And yes, we are talking about that, but we're also talking about all other forms of violence. So fighting, pushing, pulling, harassment could even be included in some cases. So I'll call some of it what I'll call playground behavior, children at school, recess, pushing, pulling hair, those kinds of things. Those are listed as violent events that have to be included. So I may not agree with it and every word of it, but that's what's got to be included. Also, incidents involving animals. So an animal attack, a dog bite, something like that, that has to be included on the incident log. That's not something that I tend to agree with, because when I think workplace violence, I think human. But the law is the law, written the way it's written. So incidents involving animals have to be included on the log. Also have to include whether or not law enforcement was called and what was done after the incident. One thing to note, part of what's in the law is that you have to have protocols in place to protect the anonymity of an employee that may be reporting a concern. And within the law, it says you have to do this in such a way that your other employees couldn't use public or private information to be able to figure out who the employee was that was reporting the concern. And that, I'll use the word sticky. That sounds to me a little sticky. Like, how do you navigate that? That could be very, very difficult. So it's for that reason, if your organization is large enough to have your own dedicated HR department or a dedicated HR manager, that person be involved with the incident and log. And I would even argue maybe they should be the ones that will maintain your workplace violence incident log. And the reason for that is because if you think about things like sexual harassment, right? Reports of a sexual harassment incident at work is a major issue. It's a big deal, but HR typically are trained and responsible for being able to investigate those sensitive reports, keep people or keep the names involved confidential until the investigation is completed. And they're also skilled in writing up a description with the nuance associated with it in a way that can be clear while protecting the innocent. So I think they're really good at that kind of thing, HR professionals. And for that reason, I think they could be a critical, positive component of this workplace violence prevention program at your business. So I recommend keeping those folks involved as much as you can, particularly with the incident log piece of it. Seta, we can go to the next one. Okay, so training requirements. These aren't too new, really. Used to what you're typically used to seeing in terms of the injury and illness prevention program and so forth. So training requirements, you have to train your employees upon implementation of your workplace violence prevention program, annually thereafter, and anytime there's a change to the program. So you'll have to figure out how to incorporate it into your new employee orientation, right? So newly onboarded employees. Within the training, in terms of the content itself, you have to have information in there that will tell an employee how to report a concern, a hazard, a threat without fear of reprisal. You got to have that piece in there. In there, you're going to have the potential violence based on their job. So if you have a server at a restaurant versus a busser, your training is going to have to delineate the difference in hazards and maybe some techniques that one can use that the other one may not be exposed to, as an example. How to respond to violence and how to avoid violence, how to pick up on certain clues, how to access your incident logs. I mentioned early in the session, I believe, there has to be an interactive question and answer opportunity for all attendees to your training. And so these days, a lot of safety training is sort of moving to video, and I'm generally a proponent of that. And I think that will be fine in this case too, as long as it's structured in a way that will name someone that an attendee or a viewer could get in touch with. If I'm an attendee and the training is on video for workplace violence prevention, I need to know if something's unclear after I watch it, who do I go to and who do I ask that would be that knowledgeable person? So that's got to be included. Additional admin details. It has to be in a language and format and level that your employees will understand. Kind of a no-brainer with that, but that is part of the law. There's no requirement on how long the training has to be. There's no requirement on how much time you can get back to a question with an answer. So, for example, if you do a video and at the end you have, so-and-so is the general manager, also responsible for this workplace violence prevention program. Here's his or her email address. There's no time component where you must get back to that employee within 24 hours or within 48 hours. Play it smartly, but just as an FYI, you've got some flexibility with that part of it. Seta, we can go to the next one, please. So ensuring compliance. If you think about the IIPP language for California, in there it says, how do you determine your employees comply, right? And Cal OSHA provides a model program. Actually, there's 4 or 5 selections there: training, discipline when needed, follow-up, reinforcement. All those things are good for compliance. I'm a big fan of drills, especially for emergency-like events where you have a situation where everybody has to act quickly, decide quickly, and you may not have all your clear information to make the decisions you would normally make. To do a drill puts you in that environment where you don't have the luxury of time. And as a benefit, it gives you a chance to really assess yourself, maybe not at your best time, but I mean, maybe one of your worst times, right? Because you can't pick when one of these events are going to take place. Emergencies, they call it that for a reason, obviously. I'm not a big fan of discipline just as a general rule, but obviously there has to be some element to it. You have to have some element within your employee handbooks, for example. I believe it was the Santa Clara Transit issue where that investigation found that employee was there for 22 years, I believe. So long-term employee, had moved up, didn't know it at the time, but maybe was a little bit angry at work, and it had at least 4 altercations with other employees prior to the shooting event, but their investigation found that discipline was never applied. And so it I think it violated their own internal policy. I think anti-bullying policies and zero tolerance policies are effective for certain things. Some people ask about bringing weapons on site. And again, kind of depends on what policy you currently have. I think no tolerance policies are good for that kind of thing, because you have some employees that, even though their heart's in the right place, maybe California's law recently changed, but maybe they have a permit to carry a concealed weapon in other states. They want to be able to bring their weapon on site, not for the bad stuff, to protect everyone else. And again, assuming that's an honest feeling in their heart, it's a good thought, but still, is that the kind of risk that you want to have to deal with at your site? I would argue probably not in many cases, but there's exceptions to all of those rules. So anyway, Seta, next slide, please. So record keeping. There's really just a couple of things you need to remember here. 15 days, this is how much time you're given if someone asks you for a copy of your program, copy of your written violence prevention program, or a copy of your incident log. You got 15 days to give it back to them. Hopefully that's the easy part. 5 years will be the stuff you're going to do first. So the risk assessment that you do, 5 years. Control measures as a result of that, 5 years. Your incident logs, 5 years. Investigations for things that occurred or things that were reported, 5 years. Your training records, who attended, the content, who the facilitator was, all that stuff, 1 year. Makes sense because you got to do it every year anyway. So essentially, you've got records all the time. But hopefully that clearly explains how long you have to keep each portion of it. Say the next slide. So effectiveness reviews, anytime an incident occurs, I would encourage you to go back, look at your plan, say, okay, did this meet all of our needs in this situation? And can we think of anything else that had the incident gone slightly another way where our policies would have been ineffective for that? Those are the kinds of things to ask when you're looking at an effectiveness review on an annual basis. Also, with turnover, has the person responsible for your plan that may be named, is that person still there? Still the same title? Just little stuff like that needs to be updated sometimes. Okay, next slide, please. So I'll wrap it up with this, and then we can have any Q&A discussions that we'd like. Restraining orders I put on here, but again, I think it's a legal minefield. I don't think I'm the person to really talk detail about it. But if you're concerned about that, or if you've got an existing issue that you're concerned about, I would say talk to your attorney first, and get advice from them. So, Seda, with that, I think we can wrap it up and open it up to any questions if we have any.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Joey. Appreciate you being here. Thank you so much for this wonderful informational presentation. We are going to go ahead and open it up to Q&A, and also you can put your question in chat as well. I will leave it up to Joey's discretion on how he'd like to go ahead and answer these questions. Also, do want to let you know that if you are also interested in afterwards, reaching out to Joey, please go ahead and email me, and I will go ahead and connect you with Joey. And I will go ahead and put my email address in the chat as well. So looking at a Q&A right now, what about
I think we've got one from Juan there. Yeah, what about incidents involving an employee that initiated a physical altercation with a customer?
Yep.
Or those reported on the incident log for workplace violence? So very good question, number one. And I think it requires a little bit of thinking, right? So nowhere did it say only victims go on the log, right? These are people involved with an incident. So I would say absolutely that goes on the incident log, but for more than one reason. It also is a trigger for you. Now, this employee has a history of violence at work. So I think, yes, it goes on the log, and also you're going to have to circle back to the employees. What'd you do about it? So good question, Juan. Very good question.
Wonderful. Thank you. Got another question. For companies that are mainly remote, but headquarters are in California, does this law still apply?
Good question, Alex. So I meant to cover this at the beginning and I forgot. So apologies there. It covers almost everyone in California, and I'll give you the exceptions. Healthcare is the one that I mentioned. So all the healthcare is out for this. They've got their own. Correctional facilities, not included. Law enforcement, not included. Locations with 10 or fewer people and no access to the public are also exempt. But I think those locations with only 10 employees or less and no access from the public, meaning can't even receive a delivery, would be so few and far between, it essentially applies to everyone. But you bring up a good point. You say mainly remote. It does not apply to teleworkers. So if that's what you meant by that question, your telecommuting employees, if they're working from their home, as with any OSHA, they have no authority there. So good question, Alex.
Okay, wonderful.
Is
Next
there a minimum
question.
employee compliant for compliance purposes? Well, so anonymous, I'm not sure who asked, but hopefully I just answered that. If you've got 10 people in a location and they have no access to the public, then technically that would be exempt.
Okay, next question. I am convicted of disturbing the peace. Do you have any program recommendations?
I don't. That's a very broad question. So I don't. I'd have to have a lot more information there before I could respond to that.
Okay. And received a thank you for your last answer.
Sure.
And any other questions before we move on? Okay.
Well, thanks to everyone. Thank you, Seta, for allowing me to be on here, and I appreciate everyone's involvement and attendance. Hopefully, some folks got some useful information out of today, and you can take it and use it.
Wonderful. Thank you. Great question here. Any good tools for mass texting?
Yes, there are. There are many. What I would suggest is just Google it, because there's a lot of different services out there. Just thinking off the cuff, Agility Recovery was a company that helped smaller businesses with business continuity planning a few years back, and part of what they offered was that very thing, a max testing function. It's probably, if you've got a corporate wireless account, there may be opportunities with your current carrier. So there's a lot of options out there. I would just encourage you to kind of Google it and see what would fit your needs best.
Okay, wonderful. Don't see any other questions, and then we can always come back if there are. So
I will say one thing that I probably should have weaved in here somewhere.
sure.
A lot of people ask me about the use of cameras. It's almost like a default reaction, especially for a topic like this. What about the use of cameras at our site? And I say, well, it kind of depends. Like when you say, what about cameras at our site? Kind of flip it around almost and think to yourself, what do I want this camera to be able to do for me or for us? Because if the answer ultimately is to be able to tell people that somebody's coming on site for a problem, well, that kind of adds another thing to it. Now, not only do you have to have cameras, but you have to have 24-hour surveillance. Because if you're not having someone that can watch that and do something about it, then it's not going to do what you hoped. So just be careful when you're thinking things through about how we're going to control our risks. That's just something to be aware of.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Joey. So we've got some upcoming events at LAEDC. May 7th at 3 p.m. to 5:30. We've got our Future Forum of Aerospace and Defense. May 15 at 11 a.m. Again, another session on workers' comp, the interactive process. And then June 20th, we do have our Select LA Investment Summit. So that pretty much wraps up. Joey, again, I just wanted to say thank you so much for being on today. We did get one more question. Do you mind, Joey, if we go ahead and do that?
Sure.
Oh, no, this says, will you be sharing the slides? Yes, and thank you so much for reminding me. This session has been recorded and the slides will be shared. Please reach out to me directly so I can put you in contact with Joey. It does make it so much easier for Joey when I do reach out to him with all the information provided by you. Please include your business name, your business address, how many employees you currently have. My email again is seta.zorabian@laedc.org. Same email that was posted when you registered. Also, anything else that I wanted to say? That's pretty much it. And then once you do email me, I will also include the actual recording of the webinar, which will be recorded and it will go on our website. Okay, so www.laedc.org. It will go on our website. All righty, wonderful. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And please stay tuned for our next webinar, which is coming up not too far from now, May 15th. Epic Insurance, appreciate you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joey. Have a good one. Bye-bye.